What will be the legacy of Harry and Meghan's return to the United Kingdom and the face-to-face meeting between King Charles and his grandchildren in Highgrove House? Who better to ask than someone that knows Harry and King Charles intimately well, the royal butler, Grant Harold. Good morning, Grant.
Good morning. How are you?
I'm very well. Did it surprise you that in the end, notwithstanding all the negative headlines about Harry's accommodation at Buckingham Palace, he said, she said, that the face-to-face meeting eventually did happen?
Half and half, to be honest with you. Part of me hoped and assumed that they would meet, but then with everything kind of taking place, I started thinking maybe it's unlikely. The only thing that was interesting that I kind of did guess that the meeting, I did have a feeling if it took place, it would be at Highgrove, only because of how, I'm sure you've been to Highgrove, Matt, but it's in a very secluded, very private location. So
The meeting happened at Highgrove House, Charles and Camilla's place out in Gloucestershire, and Buckingham Palace confirmed it happened, which, fine, that's the one solid brick in this entire conversation. Everything else, the vibe, the tension, the who said what, that's all coming from insiders, who I picture as guys in trench coats standing behind hedges with a long lens camera and an axe to grind. Now here's where it gets interesting, or at least where the tabloids decided to make it interesting. Apparently, this whole reunion came with terms and conditions attached, like a software update nobody reads before clicking agree. Reports are saying the Sussexes basically had to sign an invisible NDA just to get in the door. No photos, no details leaking, no. And then Charles said, quote, showing up in some ghost-written memoir chapter 3 years from now. One source, described as being close to the king, called the whole thing cloak and dagger, and said it was orchestrated by the king himself. Charles apparently kept the whole plan so quiet that Harry was in and out before anyone in Fleet Street even got their coffee. And you have to admire the choreography here, honestly. This is a man who is king of an actual country, running a family reunion with the operational security of a hostage exchange. No pictures, no statements. Everyone out clean before the paparazzi even wake up. If Charles ever gets bored of the throne, he's got a real future in logistics. But here's the detail that the gossip machine really latched onto, and I don't blame them, because it's juicy in that specific way where you can't tell if it's sad or just typical. Meghan wasn't seen publicly at all during this entire UK trip. Not once. The kids were there. Harry was there. Camilla, apparently, was there too, quietly sitting in on the world's most tense family tea party. But Meghan? Ghost mode. Absolutely nowhere to be found in public. Now, the official-ish explanation floating around is that this comes down to security. Harry and Meghan reportedly found out they weren't getting police protection for public appearances during this trip. So Harry went off to London solo to handle his own schedule, including an Invictus Games countdown event for 2027, while Meghan apparently stayed back, understandably not thrilled about wandering around England without the security detail that comes standard when you used to be, actual royalty. And look, that's a real, practical explanation. Security is a legitimate, boring, bureaucratic issue, and not every royal drama needs a conspiracy theory bolted onto it. But this is tabloid journalism we're talking about. And tabloid journalism treats boring explanation the way a vampire treats sunlight. So instead we get insiders whispering that Meghan is supposedly upset over claims that she and Harry used the kids as leverage to force this reunion into happening. As if bringing your own children to see their grandfather is some kind of hostage negotiation tactic. Give us press access to the palace, or the child gets a birthday party without you. Which brings us to the actual headline drama, the thing everyone is circling like sharks around a boat. Is King Charles finally done playing along? Is this the moment where Dad stops smiling for the cameras that don't exist and starts calling the bluff? Because let's be honest about the pattern here. Every single time there's a Sussex Palace interaction, there's a very predictable script that follows. Step 1, quiet, private, just family meeting happens. Step 2, leaks emerge about how emotional and healing it all was. Step 3. Within weeks, some detail from that supposedly private, sacred, off-the-record moment ends up in a memoir, a Netflix trailer, or a suspiciously well-sourced magazine piece. It's basically the royal family's version of a group chat, where somebody always screenshots it and sends it to the wrong person. So this time, apparently, Charles decided to change the rules of the game. No pictures, no leaks, no sources say the king wept. Just get in, see the grandkids you haven't seen in 4 years, and get out before the story writes itself. That's not really a reunion, if you think about it. That's risk management with a side of grandfatherly affection. And that's the real tension underneath this whole thing, isn't it? It's not, does Charles love his grandkids? I think we can all agree, sure, probably. He seems like he'd like to see them. He's not made of stone. He's made of duty and Werther's originals and decades of institutional trauma. But he does have a pulse. The tension is, does Charles trust Harry and Meghan not to turn this moment into content? And based on the security detail level of secrecy around this meetup, the answer from the palace side appears to be a polite, monarch-approved, absolutely not. Which loops us back around to Harry, and this increasingly popular theory that's been bouncing around, that Harry might be quietly looking for an exit ramp from the entire Sussex brand as currently constructed. Now I want to be careful here, because Harry wants out is the tabloid equivalent of scientists say coffee is bad for you, no wait, good for you, no wait, it gets recycled every few months regardless of what's actually happening. But there is something worth noting in the actual behavior, not the speculation. Harry showed up to a public Invictus Games event solo, without Meghan, in a country where his wife apparently couldn't get security clearance to stand next to him in public. That's not nothing. That's a very specific, very visible split in what used to be presented as an unbreakable unit. The docuseries era, the Oprah interview era, the we do everything together as a team against the institution era. And now here's Harry at a public event on his own, while his wife stays inside because the same country that used to guard her around the clock apparently decided that's not in the budget anymore. You can read that as pure security logistics, genuinely, probably the most likely explanation, or you can read it as a small, quiet signal that the United Front isn't quite as airtight as the Netflix deal made it look. I'm not saying it's a crack in the marriage. I'm saying it's the kind of image that makes people start typing, "Is Harry looking for a way out?" into a search bar. And once that phrase exists, the internet does not let it go quietly. And that's really the engine driving this entire story cycle, isn't it? It's not that anything definitively earth-shattering happened at Highgrove. Nobody is filed for divorce. Nobody has announced a permanent move back to the UK. What happened, factually, is a private family visit took place. It was kept unusually secretive even by royal standards, and Meghan didn't appear in public once during the trip. That's it. That's the actual, verifiable core of the story. Everything else, the calling Meghan's bluff, the "is this a marriage on thin ice?" that Charles finally puts his foot down narrative, that's all built on unnamed sources, palace insiders, and journalists doing the very respectable job of turning 3 confirmed facts into 11 paragraphs of dramatic tension. Which, again, I don't even blame them for. It's an efficient business model. Mystery sells. Family has private, uneventful visit, does not sell nearly as well as secret reunion turns tense. But if you strip away the theatrics, what you're actually left with is a fairly human, fairly sympathetic situation dressed up in royal costume. A grandfather who hasn't seen his grandchildren in 4 years, finally getting the chance, but so scarred by years of leaks and headlines that he has to run the whole thing like classified military operation. A son caught between 2 worlds who wants his father to know his kids, but who has spent the last several years building an entire brand, book deals, Netflix specials, podcasts, on the very tension he's now supposedly trying to quietly resolve. And a wife who, whatever the actual reason, ends up as the one person conspicuously missing from the one photo nobody was allowed to take anyway. Is Charles calling a bluff? Maybe. Is Harry looking for a way out? Also maybe. Is any of this confirmed by anyone with an actual name attached to a quote? Reader, it is not. What we know is, they met, it was secret, Meghan wasn't seen, Harry went solo to a public event, and the palace is treating basic family visits like they need the same level of secrecy as a nuclear launch code. Everything passed, that is speculation wearing a very expensive royal correspondence blazer. And honestly, at this point, that might be the most consistent thing about this entire saga. Whatever actually happens between these people, real or exaggerated, we are never, ever getting the full story. We're just getting the version that survives the leak proofing, which, ironically, might be the closest thing to royal tradition this family has left. That's the story as it actually stands. Reunion happened. It was tense by design. Meghan sat this one out publicly, and the internet filled in the rest with the enthusiasm of people who've been doing this for a decade and have no plans to stop. Because at the end of the day, nobody in this family gets a quiet Tuesday. Ever.